system, building stability from code to community. We grow reliability. Welcome to QA Roots. Roots of quality, testing the system, building stability from code to community.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the QA Roots podcast. So today it's a very special episode. It's something a little bit different than, my usual quality talking. So I really have the pleasure and the honor to host somebody that for me means and represents something incredible. David Fox. David, for those of you, perhaps maybe the younger people that don't know about David. David is a real pioneer of one of the first adventure video games, which came in the 80s from Lucasfilm, and which was, one of my favorite brands. And specifically, he is one of the creators of Zak McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders, or Benders actually,
Benders,
sorry for my Benders, very one of the, which is for those of you, that was one of the first most incredible adventure using the SCUM system, which is something that was created by Lucasfilm. And he, for me, is one of really legend and authority in the creation of the video games back in the 80s. So, David, thank you so much for making the time. And I'm really, really happy and honored to have you here in the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Such a pleasure. So, obviously, my take on Zak and, the world of video games back in the days is more from a quality standpoint. So, my first question for you, David, would be, when you were building Zak McKracken, what did quality mean to you back in the days?
Well, I think that we already had kind of a quality standard established, because that was the third game I worked on. No, wait. Fourth game I worked on at Lucasfilm Games. And for us, it was much more about trying to match the quality of the Star Wars films. In my mind, that was like one of the highest bars you could ever reach, just in terms of how tight they were, how well produced, written, whatever. And so when we started working the games group, that was kind of the standard I think we all had, was like, how can we honor the company that created Star Wars with games that we were going to be producing? And I think it was a challenge. And where we didn't know a lot about testing, though. We didn't have like a whole big testing group of people. Zak did have, there was a lead tester, and then there were 3 additional people who were on the test team. But it was mostly, I know you're going to ask this afterwards, it was mostly seat of your pants kind of testing. Like, play it like you're a player and find things that we missed. It was basically the whole thing. Try to break the game.
Okay. So basically, you had really dedicated people in the team whose work was exactly doing the testing as a real gamer.
Right. And going earlier, we did not have that for my first game, Rescue on Fractalus. It was pretty much us testing it. We would leave the game running overnight, because sometimes there are these intermittent things that would crash it. And we felt if we could leave it going all night long, then the likelihood of it finding what the problem was would trigger. And that was a lot harder than with Maniac Mansion. And Labyrinth. Zak was both of those. I don't remember formal testing in the same way. Zak might have been one of the first games where we actually had a dedicated testing group.
Okay, so basically, you got, if I get you right, so you had a group of people, and where, as you were building the game, you were providing those, let's say, work in progress versions of Zak, and then we would ask those guys play with the game and come back to us with any sort of feedback, findings. Is that right, or something like that?
Yeah, pretty much. And in my mind, there were kind of basically 2 types of bug reports I was looking for. One was the obvious one where, I did something and broke the game. There was a crash, got stuck, whatever, or something crazy happened in the game that was obviously not supposed to happen. Then there were the other extreme, which were, what did you try? Since it's an adventure game, we want you to play the game, try to solve the puzzles. And if you tried a solution which you think should have worked and there was no response from the game, if it was just like, a generic response, that doesn't work, or I can't do that, when you thought it was like a really clever idea that you had, I wanted feedback on those, because either I was going to come up with a more customized response that would be funny, or maybe even have some other reaction that would have, or it might be something which really should have solved it. For example, if what you're supposed to do is wake up the bus driver in Zak McKracken,
I remember that. Yeah.
and I had, I think that the two main ways are you could tap on his knock on the window or knock on the bus, or wake him up by
Play the
playing the
accordion.
kazoo. Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the
kazoo.
kazoo. Yeah, kazoo.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're right.
right.
Yeah.
And if you tried tapping on it with a wrench or a screwdriver or something, that should work too. And make sure that anything that would in real life would make a clicking sound,
Yeah.
then it should work in the game. So things like that, omissions, or something you try that just obviously if it broke, that would be important too. If you did something that just failed. And so we got a lot of, so the testers that we had, we really wanted them to be as creative as we were in their problem solving, because we wanted them to think outside of, maybe the narrow ideas that I had, and Matthew Kane, who's coding it with me, and try to anticipate what other players might have tried, whether they were viable solutions or not. But if they were clever solutions, we wanted to make sure we rewarded them with some response.
Perfect. So basically expecting the creative thinking and supporting also different ways of solving like a puzzle rather than the ones that you guys figured out internally.
Right.
Yeah.
At the time, we weren't all that concerned about dead ends in the game. For example, let's say there's something you really needed to have with you, and as a result, you got stuck forever and you couldn't finish the game. I wouldn't do that now in a game, but the mindset then was we were kind of looking for roughly, say, an hour's worth of gameplay for every dollar that you spent on the game. So if it was a $40 game, then roughly 40 hours. So if you got into a dead end through your own mistakes and not knowing the game, it was okay. The idea would be okay for you to have to start over or go to an earlier save game and continue from there. With games that we're working on now, like Thimbleweed Park and Return to Monkey Island, which are much more modern, even though they look similar to some of the old games. We want to make sure you never get into a dead end, that you can always complete the game from any point you were in the game. And it's a different philosophy, just the way that what people expect and how things have changed in 35 or 40 years.
Yeah, I do actually remember one of those that I think I remember as a kid I was playing and I ended up accidentally killing the double-headed squirrel or something like that, and that didn't allow me to get one of those crystals. And then I thought, oh, what shall I do now? I ended up, okay, perhaps I was very young, but I realized that there was not much that I could do rather than getting a previous save and starting again. But I found it so there was a message for me into that. So the cool philosophy. And I was thinking, perhaps one big difference in delivering software back in the days and now is, right now is all about patches. Every day I open my phone, there are patches and the concept that things can be fixed after production versus I was wondering if there was any sort of pressure that you knew you needed to deliver something perfect because there was no way probably foreseen to fix something once it was on produce and release.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, first on the squirrel thing, if you killed the squirrel, you could still complete the game. But when you went to the guru, he would make you wait for a while you were burning off your karma for having killed the squirrel. But that wasn't a dead end. But there were dead ends like running out of money. You could if you didn't have unlimited money until later in the game when you had a solution for unlimited. It was possible, for example, to jump out of the biplane, and if you didn't have a right crystal, and
get the dolphin, become the dolphin,
the dolphin, right? If you didn't have that, if you didn't have the kazoo to call the dolphin, if you didn't have a life preserver to float, so there are several things you needed. So it was possible to jump out and I don't think he would jump out without the parachute. I think that was, I think he might have refused, or maybe he would do that too. But that was an okay death, because in real life you probably wouldn't do it either. You would know better than to jump out of an airplane without a parachute. So that would be okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so to answer your question, the whole idea of like the gold disc, the final master.
Yeah.
everything was shipped on floppy disks. To have to, if there was a bug bad enough to have us either ship a replacement disk or disks or a patch. We probably really didn't patch because the disks were really had to play from the original disks. I don't think we ever did anything where you could have us change the content on the disk. That was expensive, and combination of manufacturing and shipping and tracking and the people power. So when we got down to the end and we're ready to ship, it was really, really important that we were convinced that we had all the bugs. And I remember there were games where we had to do that, and it's bad. We'd have to have a big meeting to decide whether this bug that was discovered after we shipped was bad enough that we had to do a recall, essentially. And I can't imagine that any game that we've ever shipped didn't have bugs. In fact, recently, like last year, 4 of us did a Twitch stream of a playthrough of Zak McKracken, and myself and Matthew Kane, and then 2 other people, podcaster Daniel, and it was a lot of fun. If we didn't have all the people online giving us hints about how we should complete our own game, we would have taken much longer to do it. But we got to one point where a bug showed up, and there was something that happened, which, I gave an inventory object from Zach to Annie, one of the other playable characters, and it vanished from inventory. And quickly some of the testers, the Twitch people, looked it up and said, "Oh yeah, this is a known bug. We already figured out how to rescue by going to an earlier save game and continuing." And it turned out that bug had been patched in a later version of Zach, like maybe the Amiga and the Atari ST versions. But it was a little embarrassing because we were playing the original C60 code base for that. So I'm sure there were other like that. So that would have been wasn't deadly enough, because if you had saved games, you'd go back and just not do that action. I remember at the very end, as if a bug came up like last minute before we shipped, we'd have 2 other people behind my back as I'm making the code change. Like Ron would be there, and maybe who else? And Matthew maybe, and just making sure that all 3 of us were looking at the code and making sure that the change I'm making wouldn't have any obvious ramifications. And then the whole thing would have to go back into test for it was like, what was it, 24 hours, 48 hours of test without any more bugs before we would release it. So it was pretty important. Nowadays, obviously, it's not a big deal. You just release a patch on Steam or whatever, and people just download it. And it costs us to have to make the change and do more testing on it, but it's not the terrible event that would happen back in the day with floppies.
Yeah, I actually do remember those. There is something also fascinating in the concept. You have to deliver something ideally perfect, because there is an easy way to deliver on the air fixes like today. Thinking up to probably the PlayStation 2, everything has to come visually bug free. And I really see something beautiful in this. And obviously, we don't need that to do that anymore. But things were way more completed because you could not change them. I was also thinking, did you get involved into? You mentioned the different versions. I personally played the MS-DOS one. I think it was EGA 16 colors. It was incredible. Obviously, I know there was the Commodore 64 was probably one of the first, and then something I learned over time, that there is a Femtown VGA super colorful version, which I thought it was cool, but less 80s probably. And I wonder, did you get involved in all those different versions, or some of them, and were you the guys programming the different versions of different platforms?
No. So I did get to see the art as they were doing the art. There were some of the scenes where all of a sudden, going from 8 colors or 6 colors up to 16 or 24 or 256 colors. For a lot of our artists, they had been so constrained by the limited color palettes. And when we actually started porting to new platforms, I think they got kind of carried away on some of the scenes, where you end up with some rooms that kind of look garish or look like they're too many colors, or they went too far into the color area. The one I remember for the probably FM Towns was Zach's living room. And it just, it was just like, whoa, this is too psychedelic. It was like
Yeah.
it was overdone. So I wasn't really on those projects as either as a tester or a project manager. I was probably already working on Indiana Jones at that point in The Last Crusade. So I didn't really have time to do that. The probably more involved with the PC versions that came out right after Commodore 64. But even then, a lot of it was, the art was converted. It had to be redrawn. I think I might have been involved to some degree, but the further out we got, we had more people who could take on a lot of that. Them Towns had a totally different project leader, Doug Crawford. I'm not sure exactly why, but he chose to change the opening of the game. In the C64 and I think PC, most of the versions, it would open with Zak walking back and forth with in his boss's office in the office, and then later that night, Zak was asleep,
Yeah, I
and you
remember
see
that.
him
Yeah,
in bed, and they go into
the
the
dream.
dream.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they flipped it. I think they put the dream first and then the office. And I'm not
Okay.
sure why he did that. And for me, it would not have been something I would have done because I did it the order I did it in intentionally. Yeah. By the time I saw that, it was really too late to change it. It was not worth um, getting involved in and making a big deal about. So I did talk to Chris Kahn, who was the lead tester. I've been in touch with him for a really long time, and he'd be happy to talk to you if you want to ask him any more questions or more information about that. My recollection is he was sitting outside my office and just kept on playing, and then we realized at some point that the game was big enough that we really needed more than one person. And the other thing, of course, we learned is that with anything you're testing, testers get into a rut and they come up with their own path of going through an adventure game and don't think of other things that they should try. So you really, for a lot of things, the tester becomes, I wouldn't say useless, but kind of, they're not seeing with a new eye.
Like
And so you
tunnel
have to be,
vision because they've been repeating the same over and over.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
like you get into a pattern. And
Yeah.
when I play the game, when I play the game for testing, I mean, I did a lot of testing too. I would mostly be testing to make sure I could get through the thing I just did. But since I knew how it was coded, I would play it based on the expected solutions and not really push a lot of the other possibilities. So we ended up bringing in 3 more people, one of with Judith ended up writing the hint book afterwards in the walkthrough. And she ended up being one of the leads of our new QA group, which then managed, we actually had a separate department which would do that. Came after, probably was in place for Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade. So we actually started growing it up and actually had people who were dedicated to doing that. And they also were involved with, hint lines and I think we had a 800 or 900 phone number that you people could call. You get charged per minute of time there. And there was a automatic phone tree that would let you choose where you were stuck and what you needed help on. It would hopefully give you the answer. So that came, I think we did that. I don't know if we did that for Zak. We definitely did that for Last Crusade. And then hint books were an extra thing you'd have to buy. And since this is really before the internet, it wasn't for most people. I mean, you can go onto message boards, BBSs, and try to, find the answer, but it wasn't like it is now where you have, hundreds of combination of YouTube videos or
Exactly.
Twitch streams or walkthroughs and all that.
Yeah.
So it was
I
very
actually, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I actually remember I would go to a kiosk and buy a dedicated magazine about, video games and hoping that in the next release there will be the solution of the walkthrough of the game. We'll call it a solution. And I remember when I got it, I was, oh, wow, finally I can understand how I get unstuck in that particular part where I tried everything and I couldn't. So yeah, I actually do remember. And I love the idea that you could, create like hotline where you can call and try to get those were the before the internet days. And I was wondering if the scam engine that you guys were using with Zak did it provide any testability functionality, or did it help or complicate things into the testing? Or
I don't remember that for Zach, since when the C64 was our target platform, and Zach might have been one of the last games that was on the C64. We were using, at that point, we were using Sun Microsystems workstations as our development systems. And so we were, we had a cross assembler. Well, in that we actually used like a Unix text editor, Emacs, and had a script where we would push a button, it would compile it pretty quickly, send it down via parallel port to the Commodore 64. I think it would then write an image on the floppy disk, and then we could actually play it on the Commodore 64. So there really wasn't much in the way of testing. I think we might have had a couple of things where we could like send a command to change a variable or change a value and try something. That sounds familiar, but otherwise not really. It wasn't until Last Crusade where the PCs were then powerful enough where we could do it all on the PC, maybe a 386 or something. I don't remember exactly which version.
Yeah.
And we had 2 graphic cards, one for the EGA or VGA version of the game, plus a second Hercules black and white card, which was tied to a separate monitor, where we could actually go into a debug mode and do tracing and tracking and change values and
Wow.
much more complete debugging system. And that definitely made things a lot easier, and it was also much faster because you're on the target machine with a hard drive, and all of a sudden things just went a lot faster. I think we had hard drives. I can't remember if that. Yeah, I think by then we must have had a hard drive. I can't imagine it was all floppy based.
And I guess there was, correct me if I'm wrong, massive usage of those save and load the states, which is actually, it's something that the industry, not the video games one, but testing web apps right now, it's borrowing that concept that you want to bring an application into a certain state and then test it. And I really see the analogy of video games like Zach, where you would load up the video game in a certain state where you're in a place and you have to do some action. And I was wondering if that was a shortcut for, I need to test a particular situation. I can load the game, I have a saving of the game, then I will load it there and do the testing from there.
Possibly. Something feels familiar. This might be something I might have done more recently, but the idea of a script which would set a bunch of variables to a certain thing, but that was probably more likely something I'd have to do in code before I compiled it for Zach. And then you walk into a room and I push a debug button and a bunch of values got set, and then I would load it from a save game and continue from there. So save games are really important because then you could save a state and continue.
So exactly, load fastly.
Of course, the issue would be if anything changed in the order of the variables. I remember there was a thing where the variables are really ordered in the way that you did it. So if you change the order and put one in the middle, that could throw all the other values off, and it may not have been named in the same way in the code that I saw in the source code of it. I do remember this one tester, Judith Lutero Turchin, who's since passed away, unfortunately. And she was really fun, very funny. She kind of enjoyed torturing me for when she found a bug. So she'd come up she'd stand in the doorway of my office with very mischievous, kind of devilish expression on her face. And I said, "Oh no, what did you find?" And she's, the more absurd the bug was, the more excited she'd be about it. So sometimes I'd have to go into her office to see, the screenshot or see the image of like a version of Zak McKracken, full-size version where he's supposed to be in a the tiny version was supposed to be there, and instead he's this big. Or you end up with the wrong actor costume or whatever it was. It was just really crazy things. So I said, okay, what did you find? And of course I didn't want to have to deal with a new bug. I wanted to keep going. There was also in Zach, there was one area where I overcomplicated the whole interactions, and that was really getting onto the bus. And I was trying to make it as realistic as possible. And that was the one area that throughout the whole project, bugs kept on showing up. So I would fix it, and I think I have it. And then another edge case would show up that they had caught. Like, what if Zach and Annie are by the bus? They both want to get on the bus. And what if
I remember that.
one
Yeah.
of them gets on and they don't have enough money in their cash card, or if they don't do the cash card, or how long should you wait before the bus driver automatically closes the door?
Yeah.
Or maybe you have to have the character far enough away from the bus to indicate that they're not going to get on. All sorts of interactions that probably at some point I should just say, okay, this is crazy. I'm just going to simplify it. And you get to the bus and you touch it with your card, you automatically get transported, and not the whole interactions that we had. But by then I put so much time into trying to get it right. I was convinced that one more bug fix would solve it all from then on. And I'm sure the code got really messy because of all the changes and fixes and conditions.
Yeah. And I mean, it was mega advanced. I'm just thinking, three that you could switch the players, and you need to make them interact. And I think you had some technical challenges that is for me is unbelievable, thinking that was more than 30 years ago, and the solution was incredible. Another thing that I was thinking, you also translated the game into many languages. I was very young, and I played the Italian version because I've not yet learned English back in the days. And I was thinking that the quality of the translation was very good, because I could pick the sense of humor, thinking, for instance, when Zach is figuring out the title, he would give us a journalist or whatever. And it made me laugh. And recently I watched a YouTube video, and I could, now that I play the English version, I think the translation was very well done. And I was wondering if you personally were involved into the translations, and if there was somebody that was responsible to make sure that the translated version keeps the same, coolness and sense of humor as the original.
Yeah, I remember the only translator I remember interacting with was Boris Schneider, who did the German versions.
The German, yeah.
For Maniac Mansion, Jack. He might have done Monkey Island too. And I don't know whether he managed other people for other languages, or if it was someone else, but I didn't have much interaction. The only questions, there were issues because we didn't have a parser, which made it harder for games that needed a parser, like the Sierra Online games.
Yeah.
So the first thing was, what verbs should you use that will actually fit in the slots that we had for the array of verbs?
Yeah.
German was probably the most challenging because German words tend to be much longer. So how do you come up with words that will fit in the screen space we have and be close enough to the English word to represent those verbs?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, the players had to be their own native language speakers, of course. There was no Google Translate.
Exactly.
And so people had to play the game, and they had to understand English enough to be able to understand the humor that we were doing. What was the joke, and how can you adapt it so it was not just in the correct language, but it's also culturally correct?
Yeah.
That would make sense. So, I'm sure there were a lot of substitutions and puns and jokes that only worked in English with the wording that we use, and they had to come up with something as funny in a different language.
Yeah, exactly. And also the one crazy cool thing that you guys also faced ahead of time was piracy, because I do actually remember this thing about, I think not at the very beginning, I think as soon as you needed to travel to somewhere that you need to insert this code, a couple of times I do remember I was curious what happened if I put the wrong thing, and you end up going to jail and getting lectured and so on and so forth. And so then my question is, already back in the days, you were aware of illegal copies and things like that. And wow.
Right. We had a really bad experience with our first two games, Rescue on Fractalus and Ballblazer, where they were in a beta version. Atari was going to be the publisher, and we gave them discs of the two games. And within about a week of giving it to them, they were on all the BBSs throughout the world. And
Okay.
the assumption we had was that someone at Atari uploaded it to the BBS and then they just prolificated
Uh-huh.
to all the other ones. Everyone had it. And they were close enough to final that, I mean, we knew the differences between them, but a casual game player would never notice what we changed, other than the titles of the games were different in the final release. And we didn't know we were too naive. Didn't have experience with this. We didn't serialize the discs in some way so we could track who we gave it to. And because at the same time, we also gave, I think, copy to one of the head of the company's kids or someone's kids.
Uh-huh.
It's possible they did it. We could never prove it. So because it was never provable, we did it. It was basically a loss. So in all other games, we were trying to come up with ways to copy protect in a way where it felt like it fit within the universe of the game. And then the whole thing with the pirate thing was my kind of getting back at the people who it was a cathartic kind of experience to write that code and write that scene because of that experience I had a few years earlier with the first games. And it was also funny because people obviously, like, we expected people to do it on purpose to see what would happen, and that was kind of fun. The content, we printed the code base, the codes that you had to enter on a dark red manual because it was hard to Xerox those at the time. And this is before you really had scanners that could just scan the thing. But we also think if I'm thinking this correctly, for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it was much more integrated. We ended up, you needed the Grail Diary, which was also integral to the game, gave a lot of backstories and information needed. And I think we only did it once in the beginning. And there's something you had to look up on a page and give an answer. And after that, it was kind of out of the way. And of course, we knew they were going to get hacked. Someone in Italy who was one of the prime hackers who had actually cracked the code.
Wow.
And he ended up giving us a ride from Cervignano. Is that how you say it? It's a
San Gimignano in Tuscany, probably, or
it's kind of, it was like northeast of Venice, about an
no,
hour.
that's okay. Must be another place. Yeah, I get it.
I think it's Cervignano, Cervignano.
Okay.
And anyway, he gave us a ride to Florence, and he confessed in the car that he was one of the hackers. And it was difficult because, I mean, as a kid, that was his game, was how do you crack these games? And he would, show people how to do it. And it took a while for me to feel like I could really forgive him for that. And, and I did. We became friends because he wasn't doing it to sell the games. He was doing it more as a challenge for him. Could he figure out how to crack the codes to get rid of the copy protection?
Wow.
Anyway, interesting.
This is super cool. Is there anything I'm really I like those concepts of Easter eggs or little secrets in the game? Is there anything about Zak that you never say publicly, or some secrets on some story or any particular feature of the game? Or I'm just curious here.
I think at this point, I probably have talked about most of them that I remembered anyway. People probably know that the character Annie Laris, was named after my wife. Her maiden name before she was married was Annie Laris. So in some ways, I saw her as, I used my wife as a inspiration for that character. And likewise, the two, Melissa and Leslie, were the names of the girlfriends at the time. Leslie was Matthew Kane's girlfriend, and Melissa was Ron Gilbert's girlfriend. So, and Ron was Melissa China in the game, and Melissa in real life was getting like a doctorate in Chinese something. She was living in China for a while. Actually, the real Leslie was actually one of our testers.
Okay.
I think if you go to Zak site, site.com, ZAKSITE.com, I think there might have been an interview there with Leslie
Okay.
years later that's kind of fun to look at because she was one of the testers, and maybe she had something there she talked about testing. I mean, there are all sorts of hidden references throughout the game, which people saw, like, George's first film, THX 1138. So 1138 shows up in multiple places in the game. I think that's
Yeah.
how much Zach owes on his phone bill.
Yeah.
And the address in front of Zach's house is the same address as Skywalker Ranch. There are a bunch of others like that. But if you search online for Easter eggs, you'll probably, I think by this point,
Okay.
I
I'm
don't
gonna
think there's any that I've been holding back. Yeah.
I was just I remember I was obsessed about walking to the Golden Gate, and I think Zach would say it's too far away to walk there. And I was, as a little kid, I would fantasize maybe there is a way I have to find it, and obviously there wasn't. But I was curious that it was clickable, and I thought perhaps there is a way to reach it, but I don't think there
Yeah.
was. So, but
Right.
yeah, just good.
I was saying, I know that some people try to, if they get Melissa and Leslie back into their shuttle and take off to go back to Earth, some people have let the game run for hours and hours or days and days, hoping that they would eventually reach Earth. And unfortunately, I never had code for that. That won't happen. That would have been fun, but I think we ran out of
Yeah.
space to do that. That would have been a really good joke if I had thought of it. So, okay, 9 months later, if you leave it going, here's a scene where they actually land. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, like I think it was last week, another fan in France created or posted a fake movie trailer for a live action version of Zak McKracken. And it actually wasn't live action, it was AI generated.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw that. Did I share that with you?
I heard about that, but I'm not seen that.
You should look for it. Like I think I have it in my social media feeds,
Uh-huh.
and it was fun. I mean, it's AI. A lot of people were upset that it was AI. That someone, AI has a lot of
Mm,
people who hate it because of the ecological impact on the planet.
right.
But for me, it was still really fun to see someone's vision of what they were imagining and how it might look if it were brought to.
Yeah. I actually asked a few AIs to, just for fun. Everybody says you can, prompt video games. Can you create a sequel? Whatever they did, it was just, not good enough, and I didn't have time. And this actually brings me to my last question: is if you ever thought about building a sequel, a second version of Zak McKracken #2?
I've thought of it. No, I mean, first of all, of course, Disney owns Zak McKracken along with all the other properties that we did, so I have no rights to it.
Mm-hmm.
So to have someone, in order to get Disney to even talk to you about any kind of licensing deal, you'd have to have millions of dollars of funding already to prove it. Tim Schafer was able to work with them by having Sony be the publisher, and Sony was the intermediary who talked to them for the PlayStation for some of his games. For Return to Monkey Island, which we just did 3 years ago, Devolver was the publisher, and they're big enough that they could approach, and I think they also had some personal relationships, so they were able to approach Disney for the license. So if anyone loved it enough to actually do it, I would like to be involved. I don't know that I want to be project leader and do that, but
Mm-hmm.
definitely involved with the design of it would be fun. So I definitely have thought of it. I never actually thought of what the story would be.
Mm-hmm.
And I purposefully did not play some of the fan created sequels that came out in the
Uh-huh.
90s, mostly from Germany or Austria,
Mm-hmm.
because I thought, like, if I ever was going to do a sequel, I didn't want to have their ideas in my mind, so I
Yeah.
could be sure that I wasn't unintentionally stealing an idea from them and using it.
Yeah.
So I never really played those.
Okay, but I understand if the right conditions happen, you would still be keen to get involved at some
Yeah,
point. Yeah.
I'd say the games I worked on, Zach probably was one of my favorites. It felt much more like my child
Yeah.
in that most of the games I've worked on, except for Zach and Rescue on Fractalus, were based on someone else's IP.
Mm-hmm.
Either Maniac Mansion was Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick's idea.
Mm-hmm.
Labyrinth and Indiana Jones Last Crusade were based on movies. The Monkey Island game I just worked on was Ron's original idea. So Zach was unique in it really being coming from me. And so I
Yeah.
was able to put a lot more personal touches and things that were important to me into that game.
Fantastic. Yeah. For me, really, if anybody asks me, what's your favorite video game of all time? Zak McKracken. It's really like, it defined my love for IT and all those things. It was the coolest thing. Fantastic. David, I really thank you so much for your time, your kindness, and your availability. Really, really, I'm honored to have you on board. And I don't know if you have any last message or anything you would like to say. Stage is yours. So
Yeah, I mean, for those who are interested in actually playing the game, it's available on Steam and GOG. I don't get any royalties from it, but I think it's worth doing if you want to see something that's retro, or look at a walkthrough. Look at someone online playing if you want to do it without having. To me, that's seeing you get spoiled, because once you've seen someone play these games online, you really all the puzzles get spoiled for you. So if you ever want to
yeah.
play it, you should just do it.
Yeah, I actually did it. I downloaded it from Steam, and I went one step further. I was able to install it on my iPhone because there's something called Scan VM Player or whatever. You can basically, the Steam version you can upload on your phone, and you can play. It's not perfect, a little bit to adapt, but it's absolutely playable. And it becomes a little thing that you can do here and there, whatever you got 2 minutes, occasional gaming, and love it because I really try to not watch those long play and do those enigma and whatever like I used to do many years ago, and it's a lot of fun, and some of them are quite tough and cool, and I forgot about some of them, so there is a lot of fun. It's an amazing game. It's really like everybody should be playing that. So thank you for that.
You should definitely play. There's a lane from Return to Monkey Island that I'm very proud of having worked on that game. That came out in 2022. And I feel like we took a lot of all the things we learned over the decades of doing games and, try to make things easier for the player, but also still challenging. So there's a hint system built into the game. You have a to-do list of things that automatically get filled in as you move through the game. So if you need to be reminded what you're actually trying to do next, you can take a look at that. And there's also this great feature where if you put the game down for a few days and come back, it will kind of like when you previously on Return to Monkey Island, it's like they basically give you an overview of what happened
incredible.
before to remind you. You have the option of looking at that or not looking at that.
Yeah.
So
this is creativity. It's super cool. Love the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. But definitely, if you haven't played it, definitely you should take a look at that game. And
Absolutely.
Thimbleweed Park. Also, Thimbleweed Park was a lot of fun to work on that too, which came out in 2017. So,
I remember that. Something that was the closest thing that was clearly inspired by Zak or Maniac Mansion. It was super cool. Yeah, I love that concept. Cool. Well, David, thank you so much. It was so nice to have you on board, and we keep in touch. And thank you for making this podcast. It was very amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.